The sun hung high in the sky like a molten disk, sending waves of heat rippling across the dusty red road that cut through the heart of the African savanna. It was the kind of day that made the air itself shimmer and dance, as if the world had been set ablaze by a relentless summer. Dry grass whispered secrets to the wind, and a few scraggly trees clung stubbornly to the cracked earth. Near the shoulder of this road, a sleek black SUV sat stranded, one of its rear tires a mangled mess of shredded rubber and twisted metal. The driver's side door hung open, and beside it stood Sienna Taylor, a woman whose presence seemed almost out of place in this rugged land. Her hair, a sleek cascade of dark waves, was pulled back in a ponytail that still managed to look effortlessly stylish despite the oppressive heat. Her tailored blouse and designer sunglasses, though now dusted with a fine coat of red earth, hinted at a life far removed from the realities of flat tires on forgotten roads. Sienna sighed, pushing a strand of hair from her forehead and squinting down the long stretch of emptiness ahead. She had already tried her phone, no signal. Not that she'd expected much. She'd been warned that reception out here was as scarce as water. A glance at the setting sun told her she didn't have many hours of daylight left, and the thought of spending a night alone in her car made her stomach twist. Then she heard a voice carried on the wind, light but sure, tinged with curiosity rather than concern. "You look like you've been out here all day," it said. Startled, she turned and saw him. He couldn't have been more than 19, though the lines at the corners of his eyes hinted at a life that had taught him more than most his age. He was tall but lean, with skin the color of rich earth, and his shirt sleeves were rolled up past his elbows, revealing arms shaped by honest work. A few drops of sweat traced paths down his neck, catching on the collar of his faded t-shirt. His boots were worn, their laces trailing through the dust as he stepped off the road shoulder and into the glow of the late afternoon sun. He stopped a few feet from her, his expression calm and unhurried, as though the sun's relentless heat didn't faze him at all. His eyes were a deep brown, clear and steady, holding a quiet confidence that made Sienna's carefully constructed barriers falter. In that instant, she wondered what this boy, no, this young man had seen that gave him such an ease in a place where she felt so utterly unmoored. She found her voice, though it came out thinner than she'd have liked. "I've been here long enough to hate every thorn bush in a 5-mile radius," she replied, brushing at the stubborn dust that clung to her blouse. The young man's smile came slow and warm, like the sun itself, and it reached his eyes in a way that made Sienna's heart skip. He gave a gentle chuckle, the sound rolling through the air like a promise. "Mind if I take a look?" he asked, already dropping his backpack onto the dirt. Sienna hesitated. She was far from home, alone, and the world she'd grown up in warned her against trusting strangers, especially strangers on deserted roads. But then she looked at him again, at the way his eyes held hers without a flicker of guile, and she felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time: trust. With a small nod, she stepped aside, gesturing to the sorry remains of her tire. Without another word, he pulled a pair of work gloves from his backpack, along with a compact toolkit that looked as though it had been used 100 times over. Every movement was purposeful, unhurried. He squatted down beside the tire, inspecting it with the focus of someone who understood the value of his own hands. "You got a spare?" he asked, glancing up at her. "In the back, I think," she said, grateful to have something to contribute. He stood, opened the rear hatch with a practiced motion, and retrieved the spare tire. His fingers worked quickly, loosening bolts and pulling the ruined tire free. She watched in silence, transfixed by the rhythm of his movements, the way his muscles flexed beneath his t-shirt, the quiet authority in his posture. He didn't waste a single motion, didn't grumble about the heat or the dust. He simply did what needed to be done. "You do this often?" she asked finally, trying to sound casual, though she was keenly aware of the sweat trickling down her own spine. He didn't look up as he replied, "Sometimes. My uncle had a small workshop in town before he passed. Taught me everything I know about fixing things." His voice was calm, tinged with a hint of pride but without boasting. Just a simple truth laid bare. She felt a pang in her chest at the thought of learning from someone who'd cared enough to teach him. Her own father had taught her plenty, but not about tires or engines. Her father had taught her how to hold her chin high at board meetings, how to smile even when she wanted to scream, how to dress for success, and how to hide every vulnerability behind a perfect mask. But looking at this young man, she wondered if maybe her father had missed the most important lesson of all: how to simply be. After a few more precise turns of the wrench, he stood and wiped his hands on his jeans. "You're all set," he said, with a quiet confidence that made Sienna's heart flutter. She reached instinctively for her wallet, pulling it from her designer handbag and flipping it open to offer him money. "Let me," but he held up a hand, stepping back with a small shake of his head. "No need, ma'am," he said. "I'm just glad I came down this road today." His tone was so sincere, so unassuming that Sienna felt the breath catch in her throat. Her hand froze, halfway inside the smooth leather of her clutch. "You don't want anything?" she asked, disbelieving. He slung his backpack over one shoulder, his eyes meeting hers. "I've got what I need," he said simply. She didn't know what stunned her more, his skill or his refusal. In her world, favors always came with strings, and even the smallest gesture of kindness was usually a currency waiting to be cashed in. But here, under the merciless sun, with the dust swirling around them like a living thing, he asked for nothing. He simply gave. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice softer than before. He paused, his eyes searching hers, then answered. "Jalin," he said, his name carrying the weight of honesty. "Jalin Brooks." She smiled, though it felt almost shy. "Sienna," she said. "Sienna Taylor." He gave a small nod, his lips curving just enough to reveal the hint of a dimple in his left cheek. "Nice to meet you, Miss Taylor," he said, then turned and started walking up the road, his shadow stretching long across the cracked asphalt. Sienna stood frozen, watching him disappear into the heat haze, feeling a strange emptiness in his wake. She'd come to Africa for reasons she could barely explain to herself. A business deal gone wrong, a life unraveling at the edges, a desperate need to run from the suffocating perfection of boardrooms and expectations. But now, as she watched that young man's silhouette fade into the distance, she wondered if maybe she'd come here to find something she hadn't even known was missing. That night, Sienna sat on the small veranda of the guest house she'd rented on the outskirts of town. The air was cooler now, the cicadas singing their relentless song in the darkness. A half-empty glass of local wine sat on the rickety wooden table beside her, and the glow from the lantern cast soft shadows on the red clay walls. Her phone buzzed with missed calls, her assistant, her ex-fiancé, the investors who'd smiled at her downfall only weeks ago. She ignored them all. Instead, her mind returned again and again to Jalin, to the quiet strength in his eyes, the calm certainty of his hands, the way he'd walked away without expecting a single thing from her. She didn't know what it was exactly that drew her back to that moment, but she knew it had shifted something deep inside her. She had spent her entire life building walls of success and ambition, and now, in the middle of a place where even the air felt foreign, those walls had begun to crack. She wondered where he was now, if he'd made it home safely, if he was even thinking of her. It was a foolish thought, one she'd have mocked in her old life. But out here, with the darkness pressing close and the stars burning so bright above her, foolish thoughts felt like the only honest one she had left. She picked up her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found the name of her assistant. Her finger hovered over the screen, but then she stopped. She didn't need anyone else to fix this. She didn't want another carefully managed call or a polite script about image management. She wanted real. She wanted honest. Tomorrow, she decided, she would drive that road again. And maybe, just maybe, she'd find him there. The next morning dawned crisp and golden, the sun peeking over the horizon with a promise of heat to come. Sienna woke to the sound of birdsong drifting through the open window, mingling with the scent of dry grass and distant wood smoke. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, trying to recall the dreams that had filled her sleep. They had been jumbled images of home and boardrooms, of the endless glare of her father's expectations, and of the boy Jolin standing beneath the African sun. She had told herself that it was foolish to think of him, that she'd probably never see him again. But something in his eyes had stayed with her, something in the way he had refused to take her money, had worked in silence, had left without asking for a thing. She could still feel the honesty in that moment. It had unsettled her more than she cared to admit. She pulled herself from bed and dressed simply, choosing a loose linen blouse and faded jeans that felt less like armor and more like skin. As she tied her hair back, she caught her reflection in the small mirror above the sink. The woman staring back at her looked different, less polished, less sure. She wondered if that was a good thing. She started the SUV, its engine growling to life with a familiarity that comforted her. She let it idle for a moment, staring at the horizon where the road disappeared into a haze of heat. Then she took a deep breath and eased it into gear, rolling away from the guest house and back onto the red dirt road that had brought her here. She didn't know exactly where she was going. She only knew she had to find him. The drive felt longer than she remembered. The same trees cast shadows across the road. The same dust rose in lazy swirls behind her tires. She passed the place where he had helped her, slowing instinctively, but there was no sign of him. She continued on, past the abandoned farmsteads and the rusted fences, each mile carrying her deeper into a landscape that felt both vast and intimate. Finally, near a bend in the road where an old fence leaned at an impossible angle, she saw a small cluster of buildings. A faded sign read, "Brooks Workshop and Repairs," though the paint had long since surrendered to the sun. She parked the SUV beneath the shade of a scraggly tree and stepped out, her boots crunching on the dry earth. The workshop itself was a simple structure, wooden planks weathered to a warm gray, a corrugated metal roof that rattled in the wind. The wide doors were propped open, revealing a space filled with tools and the smell of oil and sweat. She could hear music drifting from a radio, something old and soulful, the kind of song that made the day feel timeless. He was there, bent over a workbench with a piece of machinery spread out before him. His shirt clung to his back, damp with sweat, and his hands moved with the same quiet precision she remembered. She stood in the doorway, watching him, afraid to interrupt, afraid that this might be the moment when the spell broke and he became just another man. He sensed her presence before she spoke. He straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a rag, then turned to face her. His eyes, dark and steady, met hers without surprise. "Mr. Taylor," he said, his voice calm and measured. "Didn't expect to see you again." She stepped inside, feeling the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. "I was in the area," she lied, though they both knew it wasn't true. He raised an eyebrow, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. You rich folks always seem to be in the area when you want something fixed. She laughed softly, the sound surprising her. Maybe, she said, or maybe I'm just looking for something that works. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded toward a bench in the corner. You can sit if you want. I'm almost done here. She crossed the room, careful to avoid the scattered tools and oil stains, and sat on the edge of the bench. The workshop smelled of grease and sun-baked wood, a scent that felt strangely comforting. She watched him work, the way his hands moved with certainty, the way he leaned into the task as if the rest of the world didn't exist. When he finished, he set the wrench down and turned to her. So, what brings you back, Sienna? He asked, using her first name for the first time. The sound of it on his lips made her heart skip. She took a breath, choosing her words carefully. I couldn't stop thinking about the other day, she said, about how you helped me, about how you didn't ask for anything in return. He leaned against the workbench, folding his arms across his chest. That's what people do when someone's stuck. They help. She looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting together. In my world, she said quietly, help always comes with a price. His expression softened, though his eyes remained guarded. Maybe that's why you're here, he said, to find out what it feels like when it doesn't. She looked up at him, surprised by the truth in his words. Maybe, she whispered. He pushed himself off the workbench and walked to a shelf, rummaging for a moment before returning with a bottle of water. He handed it to her, his fingers brushing hers. You look like you could use this, he said. She took it, the cool plastic a small comfort. Thank you, she said, her voice thick. He gave a small nod, then leaned against the workbench again. So, what's next for you? He asked. Back to the boardrooms and conference calls? She shook her head, a bitter smile on her lips. I'm not sure I have a boardroom to go back to, she said. They voted me out, said I'd lost focus, that I was too emotional. His brow furrowed, and he looked at her intently. Too emotional, he repeated, as if tasting the words. Maybe that's what they needed all along. She met his gaze, something inside her shifting. Maybe, she said again, her voice steadier now. They stood in silence, the hum of the radio filling the space between them. Outside, the sun climbed higher, its heat pressing down like a promise. Finally, he spoke. You know, this place, this work, it's not much, he said, but it's mine, and no one can vote me out of it. She looked around the workshop, at the tools lined neatly on the wall, at the worn floorboards that had felt 100 different footsteps. It's enough, she said, her voice soft but sure. He smiled then, a real smile that reached his eyes. You think so? She nodded, her heart beating a little faster. I do, she said, and in that moment, beneath the African sun, in a workshop that smelled of oil and honesty, something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't a promise or a declaration, just a simple understanding that sometimes the most important things in life are the ones that can't be bought or sold. It was enough. The late afternoon sun hung low over the village, casting long shadows that stretched across the dirt paths in the open-air market. Sienna found herself wandering through the narrow lanes, past stalls lined with colorful fabrics and baskets overflowing with spices. The scent of roasted peanuts and fried plantains filled the air, mingling with the laughter of children and the low hum of conversation. She walked aimlessly at first, letting her feet guide her while her mind circled the conversation with Jolien that morning. His quiet confidence, the way he had spoken of his place and his work, had left a mark on her heart. She had never met anyone so unafraid to stand alone, so willing to carry the weight of his own choices. She found herself drawn to it like a moth to a flame. A woman selling beaded necklaces caught her eye and smiled warmly. Sienna paused to admire the craftsmanship, the delicate knots and vibrant colors. She bought two, slipping them into her bag with a promise to give one to Jalen later. It felt like a small gesture, but she hoped it would mean something to him. As she turned away from the stall, she caught sight of a familiar figure at the edge of the market, standing beside an old pickup truck. It was Jalen, his sleeves rolled up, sweat shining on his forehead as he loaded bags of grain into the back of the truck. His movements were efficient and strong, each lift and heave a testament to the kind of work he was made for. She hesitated for a moment, watching him from across the dusty road. He seemed to sense her gaze and looked up, his eyes finding hers with a steady calm. A small smile tugged at his lips, and he gestured for her to come over. She crossed the road, the heat rising from the ground in waves, and stopped a few feet from him. "Need a hand?" she asked, though she knew she was more likely to get in the way than help. He shook his head, his smile easy and genuine. "I think I've got it, but thanks," he said. He set the last bag in place and leaned against the truck, wiping his hands on a rag. "What brings you here, Sienna?" She shrugged, feeling suddenly self-conscious under his gaze. "I wanted to see the market," she said, though that was only half the truth. "And I wanted to see you." His eyes softened, and he nodded once. "Well, you're here now," he said. "Want to ride with me? I'm headed back to the workshop." She smiled, grateful for the invitation. "I'd like that," she said. He opened the passenger door for her, and she climbed in, the seat warm from the sun. He got in beside her, started the engine, and they pulled away from the market, leaving behind the noise and color and heading toward a quieter part of town. The road wound between low hills and clusters of acacia trees, the landscape painted in shades of gold and brown. They drove in silence at first, the hum of the engine filling the space between them. Sienna watched the way he held the wheel, the strength in his hands, the way he seemed so sure of himself even when the world around them felt uncertain. "Jalen," she said after a while, her voice low, "do you ever wonder what it would be like to leave this place, to go somewhere else, start over?" He glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "I used to," he said slowly. "When I was younger, I thought maybe I could leave and make something of myself somewhere else, but then I realized that leaving doesn't change who you are. It just changes where you are." She considered his words, nodding slowly. "I spent my whole life trying to prove I belonged in places that never really felt like home," she said. "Boardrooms, luxury hotels, private jets. But every time I walked into those places, it felt like I was putting on a show for people who didn't really care." He was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the road. "Maybe that's why you came here," he said, "to find out what it feels like to be yourself." She looked at him, her heart tightening in her chest. "Maybe," she whispered. They reached the workshop just as the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky awash with hues of orange and purple. He parked the truck and turned off the engine, and for a moment they sat there in the growing darkness, neither of them speaking. Finally, he opened his door and climbed out, reaching back to help her down. She took his hand, her fingers lingering in his, and felt the warmth of his skin. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" he asked, his eyes steady on hers. "For letting me in," she said. He smiled then, a quiet, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "You're always welcome here, he said. They stood together for a moment, the night air cool against their skin, the sounds of the village drifting around them. Somewhere in the distance, a drum beat began, slow and steady, a rhythm that matched the pulse of her heart. He turned to her, his expression serious now. "Sienna," he said, "there's something you should know. This place, it's not just a workshop. It's my home, my history. It's the place that made me who I am." She nodded, her throat tight. "I understand," she said. He took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving hers. "If you're going to be part of this, I need to know that you're here for more than just a project. I need to know that you're here because you believe in it. And in me." She reached out and took his hand, her fingers curling around his. "I'm here because I believe in you," she said. And in that moment, beneath the African stars, surrounded by the scent of dust and possibility, they both knew that something had changed. Something deep and real and undeniable. It wasn't about wealth or status or the expectations of others. It was about two people finding each other in a world that had always tried to keep them apart. And that, she realized, was worth more than all the boardrooms in the world. The sun had barely risen above the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of pink and orange, when Sienna woke to the sounds of the village stirring to life. Roosters crowed, voices drifted on the warm breeze, and the scent of wood smoke curled through the air. She lay still for a moment, letting the rhythm of the place seep into her bones. It was a rhythm so different from the corporate boardrooms and luxury hotels she had known. Slower, quieter, yet somehow more alive. She slipped out of bed, her feet touching the cool floor of the small guest house where she'd been staying. The walls were simple mud brick, the roof a patchwork of tin and thatch. Outside, a small garden bloomed with bright hibiscus flowers and clusters of cassava plants. She dressed quickly and tied her hair back, eager to see Jalen and continue the conversation they'd started the night before. At the workshop, she found him already at work. He was bent over a workbench, a welding torch in his hand, sparks dancing in the morning air. His shirt was stained with sweat and dust, sleeves rolled up to reveal strong arms marked with tiny burns from years of labor. He looked up as she approached, his eyes warm but guarded. "Mornin'," she said, her voice light. "You're up early." "Always," he replied, setting the torch aside. "The machines don't fix themselves." She smiled, appreciating the easy honesty in his tone. She liked that about him. No pretense, no need for small talk that didn't matter. "Need a hand?" she offered. He arched an eyebrow. "You ever held a welding torch before?" "Not exactly," she admitted, "but I learned fast." He chuckled, a low sound that made her heart skip a beat. "Maybe another time," he said. "This one's a bit too dangerous for a beginner." He set the torch down carefully and wiped his hands on a rag. "But there's something you can help me with." She tilted her head. "What is it?" He gestured toward a stack of papers on the bench, a mess of diagrams, invoices, and handwritten notes. "These," he said. "I'm trying to make sense of the numbers for the new solar panels, but I could use a fresh pair of eyes. I'm better with a wrench than a calculator." She laughed softly. "I can definitely help with that." She pulled up a stool and started sorting through the papers, her mind shifting easily into problem-solving mode. Numbers she understood. They had always made sense to her, even when people hadn't. As she worked, she glanced at him from time to time. He moved with purpose, his hands steady, his focus absolute. There was something almost reverent about the way he treated the tools, the materials, the workshop itself, as if every piece held a story worth telling. An hour passed in comfortable silence before she finally spoke. "Jalen," she said, her voice hesitant, "can I ask you something personal?" He paused, his hand stilling on a piece of sheet metal. "Sure," he said. "Ask anything." "Last night," she began, "you said this place is more than just a workshop, that it's your home, your history." She looked at him, trying to read his expression. "What did you mean?" He took a deep breath, his gaze dropping to the floor. "This land belonged to my grandfather," he said quietly. "He built this place with his own hands, a place where people could come and learn, where they could build things for themselves instead of waiting for someone to hand it to them. He taught me everything I know." His voice faltered. "When he died, I promised I'd keep it going. But it's not easy. There's always someone trying to take it, to turn it into something it's not." Her heart ached at the vulnerability in his words. "Is that why you've been so careful with me?" she asked gently. "Because you're afraid I'll try to change it too?" He met her gaze then, his eyes dark and intense. "I've seen what money does," he said. "It builds things fast, but it tears them down even faster. I've seen people lose themselves in it. I won't let that happen here." She nodded slowly, understanding more than he knew. "I don't want to change it," she said softly. "I just want to be part of it, if you'll let me." For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then he reached out and took her hand, his grip firm but warm. "I want that too," he said. "But you have to promise me one thing." "Anything," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Promise me you won't walk away when it gets hard," he said. "Promise me you'll stay." Tears prickled at the corners of her eyes, and she squeezed his hand. "I promise," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." A slow smile spread across his face, and he leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers. In that quiet moment, the world outside fell away. There was only the sound of their breathing, the scent of metal and earth, and the warmth of his touch. Suddenly, a loud voice broke the silence, shattering the fragile peace. "Jalen!" A man called from the doorway, his tone sharp and urgent. Jalen pulled back, his expression darkening. Sienna turned to see a tall man with a hard face and sharp eyes standing at the entrance to the workshop. His shirt was neatly pressed, his shoes polished. He looked like someone who didn't belong here. "Who's that?" she asked, her voice low. Jalen sighed. "That's Kofi," he said. "He's a local businessman. He's been trying to buy this place for months." Kofi strode into the workshop, his eyes sweeping over Sienna dismissively before settling on Jalen. "We need to talk," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Jalen stood, his jaw tight. "Not now," he said. "I'm busy." Kofi's lips curled into a thin smile. "This won't take long," he said. "You know as well as I do that the bank's getting tired of waiting. If you can't pay what you owe, they're going to take this place, and when they do, I'll be the one they sell it to." Sienna felt her chest tighten. "What's he talking about?" she asked, looking at Jalen. Jalen's eyes were hard as steel. "He's talking about a debt my grandfather took out to build this place," he said. "A debt I've been trying to pay off for years." Kofi shrugged. "The clock's ticking," he said. "You got until the end of the month. After that—" He let the sentence hang in the air like a threat. Sienna felt a surge of anger rise in her chest. "You can't just take this from him," she said, her voice shaking. "This place means something." Kofi's eyes met hers coldly. "Sentiment doesn't pay bills," he said. Then he turned and walked out, leaving a silence that felt heavier than any words. Jolin sat down hard on the stool, his head in his hands. Sienna stood beside him, her heart breaking for him, for the weight he carried alone. "We'll figure this out," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "You're not in this alone anymore." He looked up at her, his eyes full of pain and gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, and in that moment she knew that whatever storms came, they would face them together. The sun hung low over the horizon, its golden light spilling across the dusty roads that led from the workshop toward the town's small center. Sienna walked with determination in her steps, her heart beating like a drum inside her chest. Jolin had stayed behind to work on the repairs, but she had insisted on meeting the bank manager herself. She could not stand by and watch him lose everything that his grandfather had built. The community depended on this place, the children who learned here, the families who brought their small repairs and found not just service, but dignity. She would not let it fall without a fight. The bank was a modest building, its whitewashed walls showing signs of age, the letters on the sign faded by the sun. Inside, a single ceiling fan struggled to stir the heavy air. A man in a crisp white shirt and dark tie sat behind a battered wooden desk, his glasses perched low on his nose as he shuffled through papers. He looked up as she entered, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Miss Taylor," he said, his voice formal. "I was expecting Mr. Brooks." Sienna set her jaw. "He's working. I'm here on his behalf. We need to talk about the loan." The banker, whose nameplate read Mr. Osei, raised an eyebrow. "The loan is past due, Miss Taylor," he said, his tone clipped. "We have given Mr. Brooks every opportunity to settle it." Sienna met his gaze without flinching. "And he's trying. But you and I both know that what he's built here is worth more than the debt. It's worth more than any money you could squeeze out of him." Mr. Osei's lips pressed into a thin line. "Sentiment doesn't pay debts," he said, echoing Kofi's words. "We are not a charity, Miss Taylor." Sienna leaned forward, her voice low and fierce. "No, you're not. But you are a part of this community, and if you sell that workshop to Kofi, you're selling a piece of this town's soul. Do you really want that on your hands?" Osei hesitated, his eyes flickering. "It's not my decision alone," he said. "There are regulations, obligations." "Then let me help," she cut in. "Give me a chance to raise the money. I know people, I have resources, but I need time." He regarded her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he sighed. 2 weeks, he said. "But if the money isn't here by then, the property will be repossessed." Sienna exhaled slowly. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. She turned and left, the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Back at the workshop, the air was thick with tension. Jolin stood by the main table, a piece of metal in his hands, his knuckles white. He looked up as she approached, his eyes searching hers. "Well?" he asked. "We've got 2 weeks," she said. 2 weeks to save this place." He let out a long breath, setting the metal down carefully. 2 weeks, he repeated. He rubbed a hand over his face, the lines of worry deepening. "That's not a lot of time." "It's enough," she said fiercely. "We'll make it enough." Over the next days, they worked harder than ever. Sienna called in every favor she had, reaching out to contacts back home, old friends, even rivals. She organized a community fundraiser, inviting every family in the town to come and see what the workshop meant. She made posters with Jalin's help, handwritten letters with local kids drawing bright colors on the borders. Word spread quickly. On the day of the fundraiser, the dusty yard outside the workshop was filled with people. Families brought dishes to share, children played tag between the benches, and an old man tuned his guitar to play music that had been passed down through generations. Jalin moved through the crowd, shaking hands, fixing broken chairs, smiling despite the worry that creased his brow. Sienna watched him from the steps of the workshop, her heart swelling with pride and fear. This was more than just a building. It was hope itself. And she would fight for it with everything she had. Late that night, after the last of the guests had left and the lanterns had been extinguished, Jalin found her sitting alone at the table where they had counted the donations. Her head was bent, her hair fallen across her face, her fingers tangled in the bills and coins. "How much?" he asked quietly. She looked up, her eyes red. "Not enough," she whispered. "It's close, but not enough." He sat down beside her, his hand closing over hers. "You did everything you could," he said. She shook her head. "It's not enough," she repeated. "I promised you I'd help you keep this place, and now—" He silenced her with a gentle squeeze of her hand. "Hey," he said softly, "you didn't promise to fix everything. You promised to stand with me, and you did. That's more than anyone else has ever done." Tears slipped down her cheeks, and she pressed her forehead to his. "I don't want to fail you," she whispered. "You haven't," he said. "We're not done yet." The next morning, the sun rose red and angry over the town. Kofi arrived early, his car gleaming in the light, his smile smug. He stepped from the vehicle, adjusting his expensive watch, and sauntered toward the workshop. Jalin stood waiting, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "Time's up," Kofi said, his voice oily. "I trust you have the money." Sienna stepped forward. "We have most of it," she said, "but not all." Kofi's smile widened. "Then the deal's done," he said, reaching for the papers in his briefcase. Jalin's jaw clenched. "We're not giving up," he said. "Then you're delusional," Kofi sneered. "Because the bank's going to sell, and I'm the only buyer. This place is mine." Sienna's eyes blazed. "You think you can just buy it? You think money is all that matters?" "It is," Kofi said simply. "And you, Miss Taylor, should know that better than anyone." A hush fell over the yard as the townspeople began to gather, drawn by the confrontation. Jalin stood tall, his voice steady. "You might have money," he said, his tone quiet but powerful. "But you'll never have what we have. This place is more than wood and metal. It's community. It's trust. It's hope." Kofi's smile faltered just slightly. "Hope doesn't pay debts," he spat. Sienna stepped forward, her voice clear. "Maybe not," she said, "but it builds things that last." At that moment, a car rolled up, its tires crunching on the gravel. The door opened, and a man in a tailored suit stepped out, holding a briefcase. He walked straight to Mr. Osei, who had come from the bank to oversee the transaction. "Are you Mr. Osei?" he asked. The banker nodded. "Yes," he said, puzzled. The man opened the briefcase and handed over a stack of papers. "I represent a private investor who believes in this community," he said. "The full balance of the debt, plus interest, paid in full." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Sienna stared, her heart pounding. Jalin turned to her, his eyes wide with disbelief. Kofi sputtered, his face pale. Who did this?" he demanded. The man smiled. "Someone who believes that hope is worth more than money," he said. Sienna looked at Jalin, tears streaming down her face. "We did," she whispered. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her, his voice thick with emotion. "We did it together," he said. And as the sun climbed higher in the sky, painting the world in light, they stood there surrounded by their community, by the people who believed in them, and by the unshakable truth that some things could never be bought. Hope had won.